Where does God of War go after Ragnarok? Well, there are a lot of hints in the game that tease that, according to game director Eric Williams. We already went over this in a previous video, so I will give you a quick summary of that in a moment, because this will be a follow-up discussion talking about the many interesting insights and theories that a lot of you shared in the comments. So if you want to know about all the potential mythologies the series could explore next, you came to the right place. Obviously, this video contains spoilers for the entirety of God of War Ragnarok, so come back later if you haven't finished the game yet. If you've been enjoying the game and enjoy the content here on the channel, then leave a like to help us out, subscribe for way more content like this, and let's go. So in that previous video, which I will link to in the video description, we discussed what Eric Williams hinted at as the biggest tease for the next mythology, which is Tyr. If you find the real Tyr in Niflheim after the end of the main story, he will appear in several of the realms in specific poses or motions, which Eric said was a hint towards the next mythology. So from what we saw there, I concluded that the most likely mythology being hinted at was Hinduism. And turns out there is actually another hint towards Hinduism, which links back to a very important character in the current story, Angerboda. Xkarma noted in the comments under our previous video that her fighting style reminded them of the Holi festival, also known as the Festival of Colors. This festival originates from Hinduism and is celebrated in some parts of the world by throwing around powdered paint and colored water. And you probably already guessed the link, because most of Angerboda's attacks in the game also revolve around throwing powdered paint around. Now obviously this could also simply be because she is a painter, but the visual reference is at least interesting and it also really stands out, so maybe that's for a reason. Some comments also mentioned one of her paintings displaying a potential Hindu god because of the many-armed creature at the center. And while it is true that many Hindu gods have in fact multiple arms, this drawing is most likely of Starkadr, as we can see a very similar image of him in one of the shrines from the first game. But I have to admit, a lot of you raised the very valid point that Hinduism is still being actively practiced, so sending Kratos or Atreus to that mythology with the potential of one or more of the gods dying would definitely bring some controversy. Now I still think Sony Santa Monica can make a compelling story where we don't go around killing gods, so I still think it's a possibility, but it would be something they'd have to be very careful with in order to avoid any public uproar. And besides, from what I know, there are no hints currently in the game that the Hindu pantheon is one that even exists, because a lot of other mythologies have actually been hinted at in the game, mostly due to Tyr's collection of items from his travels. Some of these can actually be found as artifacts in Ragnarok, like this Maya statue, which is of course very interesting, or the Ankh symbol, which is another hint towards Egypt. We'll get back to that theory a little later in the video, because the most interesting item I found was the Kila dagger. This is a ceremonial blade that is often associated with Buddhism, which is of course another one of the religions we thought Tyr could be hinting at in that previous video. Unfortunately, the description in your journal only talks about its function and not where it actually comes from. But the reason why I'm picking this dagger as the most interesting artifact is because you find it literally right next to Tyr's spot in Midgard. He doesn't really acknowledge it of course, but out of all the places he could be standing, they place him right next to that specific artifact that you can already find there before he ever shows up. I just think that's very curious, and it should definitely put Buddhism higher on the list of likely mythologies for the franchise to explore. And while I did say that I wasn't sure if the mythology was expansive enough for a God of War game, Dark Matter was kind enough to remind me of the existence of Journey to the West. It's a very famous novel that incorporates elements from multiple mythologies, including Buddhism, Taoism, and Chinese folk religion, with one of its most famous characters being the Monkey King's son Wukong. You might have seen some footage of that Black Myth Wukong game, which is also based on that same story. And the theme of the story I think is very fitting for where the series is going after Ragnarok, as Wukong was imprisoned for rebelling against the heavens. During the story of Journey to the West, he serves as a companion for the Buddhist monk Tang San Zang, and by the end he reaches spiritual enlightenment and is forgiven for his earlier rebellion. So in a way, that is a very similar journey to the one Kratos went on. And with Atreus likely playing a bigger role in the next installment next to Kratos, I also think son Wukong would be a great companion for him. He too can change his shape to turn into different creatures, so perhaps he could teach Atreus a trick or two. And speaking of tricks, Wukong is known as a trickster, kind of similar to Loki from Norse mythology. So while we haven't really seen that side of the boy's personality yet, maybe this is who he learns it from. If we were to follow this story either as Kratos or Atreus, it would take us through both India and Central Asia, which are both places that match up with the motions that Tyr is doing in the different realms. So it's definitely a likely candidate for a future setting, especially since it covers elements from multiple mythologies, something God of War is already currently doing. Which actually leads me to another interesting point from Ragnarok that could tease a future setting, which is the identity of everyone's favorite talking head, Mimir. As pointed out by Chicago in our comments, Mimir wasn't always his name, and it's from the Nornir that we learn his given name, Puck. Perhaps best known for his appearance in the play A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare, Puck was a fairy who served the fairy king Oberon. This checks out with Mimir's earlier stories, as in God of War 2018 he tells about having served as a king's jester, but then he says he left when the king grew weary of his antics. On approaching the well, we also hear one of the Nornir call him Robin of the Goodfellows, which is an alias of Puck, so that pretty much seals the deal already. We also hear Sigrun mentioning a character we have not met, Titania, in Mimir's vision on the way to the Well of Urd. And well, surprise surprise, she is actually the fairy queen in Midsummer Night's Dream, and the vision implies that, like Freya, she was being used by a powerful man for his own good. Since we already spent a lot of time clearing up Mimir's mess in Svartalfheim, for instance, who's to say we won't take it further and travel back to his homeland to set things right? There are actually a lot more mentions to both Celtic and English culture. Mimir also retells the story of Macbeth, another very famous Shakespeare play, and the horse we ride to get to the Well of Urd, a Kelpie, is actually a creature from Scottish folklore. So we now know travel between the Norse and Celtic lands is very possible, as both Mimir and this Kelpie found their way from one to the other. But by far Mimir's most interesting mention of his homeland is that of a lake nymph called Nimue. He mentions this right after forging the Draupnir spear in Svartalfheim and insists that there was a lake nymph from his homeland who made the best swords in all the Isles, ending the story wondering what became of her. And well, we actually kind of know, because it is very likely that this is the same Nimue, or Lady of the Lake, from Arthurian legend. Now there are multiple retellings of this story, but the fact that Mimir talks about her skill in both wielding and making swords, I think it's likely that she will be the one to make and give the legendary sword Excalibur to the future King of England. And since it looks like the series is sticking with the trend of introducing one new, well thought out weapon per game, who better to put this legendary sword to the test other than Kratos? I know a lot of people wanted to see the Blade of Olympus back for Ragnarok, but I'd argue one of the few swords that could top such a weapon is the mythical Excalibur. Now that is of course just speculation, but when you put all of this info together, it really is interesting how many hints there are towards Celtic mythology in Ragnarok. But I still think this might be set up for a much later entry, as Eric Williams did say we should look at Tyr specifically for clues, and most of those still lead me to believe that we will be going somewhere in Asia. Now a lot of you brought up another thing connected to Tyr from the previous game, which was the missing part of Tyr's shrine that had symbols from different mythologies on it. I didn't immediately recognize all of them, but Redditor Call Me Catman correctly identified the symbols as the following. Top left we have the Egyptian Eye of Ra, top right is the Greek Omega symbol, then bottom left is the Japanese symbol known as a triple tomoe, and then the Celtic triskelion on the bottom right. Interesting, by the way, that a Celtic symbol also pops up here, but that's not the main point. The main thing is that a lot of people use this mural as a piece of evidence that we will either visit Egypt or Japan for the next entry, because alongside the Norse mythology, these are the four main confirmed pantheons in the universe. Well, first of all, thanks to the stolen treasures in Ragnarok, we know that is not true, because we also found artifacts from Mayan and Buddhist culture. But second of all, I think this mural is meant to show where Tyr has been, not necessarily where we will go next. So while Celtic, Egyptian and Japanese mythology are all possible options for Sony Santa Monica to explore since they've confirmed their existence in the God of War universe, I still think the most concrete piece of evidence we have is Eric Williams hinting towards Tyr and his poses in the different realms. After doing some more research thanks to your comments, I'm leaning more strongly towards something inspired by Journey to the West, but at the very least, I still don't really believe that Egypt will be the next major step anymore. Like I mentioned in the previous video, we know this is a studio that likes to do the unexpected, and I think Egypt has been speculated about even before 2018 came out, so that would be the easy way out for them. I am more than happy to be proven wrong on that though, as I do think Egypt would make a really cool setting. But I'm still inclined to believe that we get to see something set in Asia with Hinduism or a combination of mythologies like Journey to the West as the most plausible options. So what do you hope to see in the future for God of War? Let us know in the comments. More theories are of course always welcome, and we will keep you posted here when we learn more. So subscribe to miss nothing, leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and if you want, you can watch our previous one where we go over more potential spin-offs for the franchise by clicking on the screen. I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.